Welcome back, guys, to the next episode of my best opening idea format. I have a lot of different ideas which I want to show you, so let's jump right into it. To start with, I found quite a few interesting ideas in the King's Indian for the black side, which I think offer a very decent practical chance. The first two are in the King's Indian Sämisch. The first being played by Alexander Grischuk in already the Moscow Aeroflot Open, which is already back a couple of months. And it appeared through this move order after bishop e3, a6, and now after the move queen d2. First of all, after knight e2, there is the possibility to play the move b5, which I've also recommended in my King's Indian course for chess base. So often what is white doing, at least from this move order, is to start with queen d2, because now b5 doesn't work well, because the bishop can then take on b5. And Grischuk played the line with c6 now again, which I thought for a long time is not really correct anymore, but it turns out that it's actually quite a playable alternative to some of the other variations, like for example the old line with knight c6 followed by bishop d7, rook b8. So the idea of c6 is obviously to prepare to move b5, but usually the whole idea of the line, or from my understanding with modern engines, it was quite difficult to make it work because white also has quite dangerous ideas to play on the king side with h4 and h5. But Grischuk made it work quite nicely after long castle b5 was played. And his opponent played the move g4 here, which is one aggressive way of playing. Also, a dangerous move is the move e5 here, which I think is the critical move. But it turns out that it's actually not so bad for black. I just think that you should not go into this endgame, because this looks quite depressing. But both knight fd7 and knight e8 seem to be quite interesting. I had the most fun here with the move knight e8. And after f4, queen a5, there were a lot of fun lines here, which I was able to discover. There are no more games here, by the way. I think queen a5 was the moment where it is a novelty. Yeah, there were still games with bishop g4 and b takes c4. But here the point is that b4 is a threat, so white should go for the move king b1. And now after b4, knight e4, c5, just the whole board opens up, and it's a lot of fun. Actually, the only move for white not to be worse here is to try to keep things close with d5. But going a little bit further here, it turns out that black is actually doing okay. Bishop takes e4 is possible. Bishop takes e5 is also possible. I checked both of them a little bit more in depth, but all in all, the line is playable as far as I can see. Yeah, h4 should be replied with h5. White could also try to get this if they start with h4. And here, if e5 here, you cannot take twice because the queen on d8 is hanging, but instead the move knight h7 is possible. And also here, it's just a huge mess. f4, knight b6. I think there was some correspondence game here, which I just copied in. And as you can see, the whole board is on fire, but it doesn't look like it's bad for black. These were just a few moves which I made. Rook c8, knight f8 is coming. Knight could also come to e6 later on. And white's attack, for the time being at least, is not breaking through on the king side. So let's see how Grischuk's game went. g4, knight d7 was played. And also here, after h4, from what I understood of the line, is that h4 should usually be replied by going h5 with black. White should go for the move e5 here as well. Taking is not good after knight takes h5. Black is already comfortable. After knight e2, queen a5, black is actually better already because b4 is coming and it's quite dangerous for white. So Grischuk's opponent played quite critical here with e5, and now what black should do is this sacrifice on g4. F takes g4, queen a5, and black is down a whole piece for just a pawn. But if we look at the position a little bit more closely, we can see that b4 is a huge threat, and also after knight takes e5, many of black's pieces are actually joining the attack. If knight f3, then b4, this is how Grischuk's game went. Actually, black doesn't even have only one way to play here. Also h takes g4 was possible. But Grischuk won in quite a nice fashion here. This is how the game went. And white should take on h5 here, but instead went bishop e2. And now Grischuk was already better. At this point, he doesn't even have a material disadvantage anymore. 3 pawns already. And yeah, black's initiative was very strong. After g takes h5, what black should do is bishop f5 and bishop d3, rook a8. Also here, black is not worse. It just goes on. It's unclear. There was even one correspondence game from the year 2021, which did eventually end in a draw as well. All right, so let's move on to the next idea as well in the King's Indian Sämisch variation, which originally I was able to find this from the game of Henriques. I was just checking that, which is one idea specifically against this knight ge2 move order. Now, again, you could go for the move a6, which is transposing to what we've just talked about after bishop e3, b5. But here, at least, white does have an extra option with bishop g5, which is not often played anymore nowadays, but it is an extra option. And this idea is quite funny and very rare, knight fd7. It was also played twice by Prague, as I see now. And since the pawn on c4 is not protected now anymore, black has the surprising idea of seeking counterplay with knight b6 next against the c4 pawn, and then attempting to play on the queen side, or even sometimes breaking in the center with f5. Bishop e3 is the move which was played. After bishop g5, black can also go knight b6, and after b3, usually a5 is the reaction, with the idea of advancing here on the a file with a4 next. If bishop e3, then knight b6 was actually the novelty introduced by Henriques. Prague in the past, I think, has played c5, which is also not bad, but here black is probably not equalizing. It seems like quite a good version of the banker for white, because the knight is maybe not super useful on d7 here. There is knight e5, but white is probably a little bit better here, just is up a pawn, and it's not so clear how black can get sufficient compensation. But knight b6 was a strong novelty, and his opponent reacted with the move b3. If knight g3, then black should go knight c6. Since now the d4 square has been weakened, black will get the knight there. Followed by f5 gives black pretty decent counter chances. So b3 was played. Now a5 is the best move. If white stops all of this with a4, you could try to think about just occupying the b4 square with a knight, or f5 is possible as well. Again, also here the b4 square looks quite attractive for black in the long run. Queen d2 also looked very logical to me and appears also to be quite critical. Now we can go a4, threatening a takes b3, so white should move the rook, take, and knight c6. And also here, one important idea for black is to break with the move f5 next. And to keep it short here, f5 is coming, and it seems like the position is very much playable for black. Of course, some analysis is needed here. I did check it a little bit further, but all in all, it was not bad for black at all. h4 was played in the Henriques game. Black should stop the expansion by going h5 himself, and white now played the move g4, which is a little bit too ambitious. This just doesn't work so well here. Instead, queen d2 would have probably been better, but it is transposing to something very similar, which we've seen before. After g4, black took, and after h5 just took another pawn, knight g3, and now Henriques played the move bishop g4, which also kept a nice advantage, but c5 would have actually been almost winning on the spot. Since the long diagonal is now weakened, knight c6 is coming next. White does not really have great chances of survival here. Black is close to winning at this point already. So overall, knight fd7, very, very rare. Only 14 games in my database here so far. And it seems like it's working out quite nicely, objectively speaking, for black as well. Okay, so let's go to the next idea in the King's Indian complex, which is actually one small line for white, which I've recently encountered, which is here this move bishop f5, which is actually nowadays very, very popular. Many black players go here just to avoid the mainstream theory in the King's Indian and still try to get somewhat of a similar structure like in the King's Indian. And at the same time, of course, stopping the move e4 is kind of the main idea of black here. Queen b3 is the move which I'm recommending here. It is the third most popular after g3 and knight h4. After knight h4, black's idea is to go back, and if e4, then go e5, when now black can argue that the bishop is better placed on d7 than on c8 if white goes knight f3 back. So here there are some ideas for black, I think, to make this line work. After queen b3, black usually goes b6. Queen c8 is a little bit too passive. Now white can go h3 followed by g4, and it's really not great for black. White just has too much space here, and it's almost +1 here at this point already. And just to show a few more moves ahead, the queen can go back as well. Knight d4 is just not working here, and otherwise black just has a terrible version of the h3 g4 King's Indian. And after b6, again, the main moves here are g3 or h3, but the line I would like to show you is the move e4, which was firstly introduced, I think, by Dubov. There was one game before him who played it in 2024. And it is a pawn sacrifice, but a very interesting one, because black has to be very careful not to run into trouble immediately. If black goes back with the bishop, if he doesn't take the pawn, let's start with this. White can go e5, and after taking d takes e5, white is already winning on the spot. This is just very, very bad for black. Knight takes e4 is also bad, even though it has been played 2 times, and bishop takes e4 has also been played 2 times, but knight e4 is the wrong recapture, because now white can play g4. And after knight takes c3, g takes f5, knight e4. Black is up a pawn, but the light squares are extremely weak in this position, and the computer even wants to castle short here. Also bishop e3, which seemed more logical to me, followed by queenset castle, also gives white a big advantage, almost +1 here. So this is what I looked at. The machine wanted to play like this, followed by rook g1, and it just seems like white's attack is almost winning here, because there are some rook sacrifice ideas on g6 even, like here it was working already, and yeah, white is checkmating black here. Of course, I made a nil move here, but just to show the idea here for white. So the best is bishop takes e4. Now we take, and now white should go h4 here, aiming to play h5 next. And it's difficult for black, I think, from a practical point of view, to react now. In both games which reached this position, black played the move h6, which is probably not the most precise reaction, because now g4 is coming. The bishop can come to g2 next, and black is suffering a lot on this long diagonal, and the knight on e4 is also a little bit misplaced, or a bit vulnerable. For example, knight f6, g5. Take knight g5, this was the one game which actually gave me the idea of the line, and black almost immediately got into a very bad position here. White is castling queenside, and white won a very nice game here. It was played by Kamalide Nova Meruert. Just a quick shout out here for this idea. If black doesn't go h6, knight f6 or h5 are probably the better alternatives. Just to give you a small idea here, I would probably go for h5 here, and after knight takes h5, just sacrifice the exchange, followed by knight g5. And black has to be very careful here not to end up in big trouble. For example, h6, knight takes f7 is already working out for white nicely, because the rook on a8 is also hanging. And after knight d7, my main line continued with c5, e6, queen f3. I will stop at this point. There is somehow forcing draw here if black manages to find everything. But yeah, it's not so likely that they will, and very, very difficult for black to find a way here. h5 is maybe a little bit more logical, but it does weaken the g5 square, and in general the whole king side a little bit. Like for example here, some sacrifices on g6 are already looming, and if bishop g7, this sacrifice here works as well, because the bishop on g7 is hanging, and king f8 loses because of knight g5. Also here, black is probably holding somehow with king d7. I did check this a little bit further, but it doesn't look like a lot of fun for black to enter this line. Yeah, knight c6 is another move I looked at here, but c5 seemed quite dangerous with the idea of bishop b5 next. So all in all, I think those are the most important ideas here, which you should remember. And possibly you can punish black for this early bishop development here with bishop f5. I think this is quite a dangerous line, which white can try and possibly win out of the opening. Okay, so next up we have 2 ideas in the Petroff, which I was able to encounter. The first one right here in this line, after d4, knight takes e4, d takes e5. I did already cover in my World Cup video this idea here, bishop c5, queen d5, which was played by Hare Krishna in his famous game against Nesterov, which then led to a queen sacrifice, very fascinating line which white can try. But d5 is still usually what black is doing, knight bd2, and now the modern move is the move queen d7 in this position. And here I was able to see 2 games which featured a very interesting and new idea. Just quickly to mention, knight takes d2 is by the number of games the main move. And here I was at one point checking this line here with c4, which seems to me like it's still a little bit underrated. Bishop d3 is by far the main move. It seems like c4 is a very interesting line which white can try. The idea is then to actually develop with queen c2 followed by queen set castle. And practically it seems to me like this is something where black has to be quite careful here. But the idea which I would like to show you is in this line. There's still about 100 games here. Short castle. Bishop e7 is usually the move which is played, and now the move h3. Rook e1 is by far the main move here, with still around 30 games with the idea of knight f1, knight g3. But here black is usually prepared for this one. But instead h3 is a pretty funny idea. The point is after short castle, there's the move knight h2. This was already played by Grebnev in the year 2025, but recently I saw it of the German IM Alexander Krastev, who played it in the German Bundesliga. And the idea just looks very funny because knight h2 is not the first move which you would make, but white then wants to put the other knight to f3 and then launch an attack on the king side. I do think that after h3, knight f4 is kind of a small problem. To my surprise, in none of the two games black did go for this. Does seem like quite a good solution for black. I wasn't really able to find a big idea for white here. Black can get the bishop here and then play something like c5, knight c6. It's not like the position is not playable for white here anymore. Like white can play this with the idea of knight g3 and maybe knight h5 later on. But this seemed to be the best for black in my opinion. This knight h2, knight f3, it can definitely go wrong for black. Knight c6 was played in both two of the games, knight df3. And in Grebnev's game, black played the move f6, which was already quite bad because this was how the game went. Now Grebnev could have played c3 with a big advantage. Ideas like rook e1 coming next. Rook e1 was played in the game, but it did allow knight ed4. That's why c3 first would be a bit more precise, giving white a big advantage. In Kastev's games, knight c5 was played, which is probably still the best move, but now rook e1, and white does have some ideas on the king side, like Kastev also played in the game. He played knight g4 and then did start attacking over there and was able to win the game eventually. So still, I think a nice idea. At least it's a pretty cool plan with knight h2, knight f3, but of course, knight f4 needs to be investigated, and I was not able to come up with anything special here so far. Yeah, the next idea which I'd like to show you was played by Aram Hakobian, a very strong theoretician from Armenia, played in the Stepan Avagian Memorial in Armenia a couple of weeks ago. And I thought it would be nice to give something against this line here, which is also very, very topical nowadays. And Hakobian started with the move c4. Usually white goes rook e1 first, and then after short castle, either then c4 or then knight bd2. But this seemed quite interesting. Now black should usually take on c4, and that's what they usually do. Also happened in the game. Bishop takes c4, short castle, and rook e1. Now white is kind of ready to proceed with a move like knight c3. Black usually goes knight c6, knight c3 anyway, and now knight d6. There are still 41 games here, now that I see. And Hakobian played the very rare move bishop f1 in this position, which invites black to play this nice move knight b4, looking like black is going to win some material quickly with the move knight c2. But I'm not sure that knight b4 is actually the best practical move in the position. I would probably go bishop f6 instead, knowing at least knowing what then happened in the game, how dangerous it can become for black quickly. And here after knight e5, now black should go for the move knight b4. And after rook e2 c6, a3 knight d5, it is very, very close to quality here, but still, if I would pick someone, it would probably be white, just because the queen is a little bit more active. Of course, the rook on e2 is not perfectly placed, but bishop f4 could come in next as well. So still, maybe a microscopic pull for white here, maybe a tad bit easier to play. Knight b4 was played by Hakobian's opponent, another very strong theoretician from Armenia, Hovhannisyan Robert. And now a3, this was the novelty. Inviting knight c2 anyway, but it turns out that it goes on. After knight c2, Hakobian played the move rook takes e7. Queen takes e7 and now rook a2. And all of a sudden this knight on c2 is in somewhat of trouble on c2, and it can easily be trapped. Rook f8 played by Hovhannisyan, still a good move. b3, also a good move. And now black already has to find this move knight e1. This is important, otherwise rook takes c2 actually gives white a very nice position, should even be winning here, even though it's not so easy to understand this type of material constellation, but the computer does give a winning advantage here for white. So black should go for the move knight e1. And now knight e5. And I'll just show what happened in the game here. Black played f6, which actually was a big mistake, because after knight c4, bishop d3, now white could have taken on d6 and now had to spot this insane move knight e2, which is most definitely what Jacobian missed. And it's a very difficult move to spot as well. Point is that e1 is not, it's not possible to save the knight on e1 anymore, and white does have close to a winning advantage here. Instead, bishop e3 was played. I think that later on, Jacobian still had some chance to get a big advantage, but eventually the game then ended in a draw. Instead of f6, what black should do is the move c5, which is the only move for equality in this position. And now after knight d5, queen d8, knight e3, after a bit of time here, rook takes e5, the position is going to come towards a draw here like this. This is the line which I looked at, queen takes d3. Also with the important point that in the end there is still the move queen f1 when a draw is the most likely outcome here. So if black knows all of this, then they have earned a draw, but I don't think it's such an easy task. And maybe there was also some other idea for white in those forcing variations which could be tried as well. So overall, quite like this idea. I'm still not sure that from black it's the best practical decision to go for knight b4. Instead, it does seem a little bit more practical to me to play the move bishop f6 instead. But still a very good chance for white to try this out in a practical game. Yeah, the next idea which I would like to show you is for all of my d6 Sicilian players from the black side. This system, almost all of you have probably seen. Doesn't matter if you're an amateur or a grandmaster. Recently, Carlsen has started playing this almost non-stop. And if you're more on the amateur level, then probably you've also encountered it numerous times before. Because it's quite a simple setup for white. They want to develop in this Italian/Spanish way of developing with d3, c3 quite often, and therefore it's quite popular. And even objectively speaking, it's not a bad opening for white. And I've also checked it for white on some occasions myself. So knight f6, d3, and now I would like to propose starting with the move a6. Already more or less threatening b5, not that it's a winning threat, but if white plays a move like short castle, it does seem like black has gained a lot having this extra space on the queen side, and that's also why white usually doesn't allow that and starts with a4. Now knight c6, white almost always castles short, and here there is this small little move h6, which was at first already played by MVL in the year 2022 against Levon Aronian. Looks quite stupid, to be honest, but there is actually a nice point behind it, which is that we want to wait how white is actually developing next, and the move h6 is very likely useful in connection with bishop g4 coming up next. The problem with the immediate bishop g4 is that now after h3, bishop h5, g4, bishop g6, white has this move knight e1. Now f4 is coming next, and the bishop on g6 is in quite some trouble here. And having h6 extra then very often can be quite useful in the ensuing positions. Also, we just want to wait what white is doing. For example, if white wants to avoid that by going h3, we can start attacking with g5 followed by g4, giving black quite some nice attacking chances on the king side. Knight c3 is usually not the move which white wants to play anyway nowadays. They would rather play with c3, so now just e6 followed by bishop e7 short castle, and the knight on c3, in my opinion, is more misplaced. Knight bd2 is also not critical. Black can go bishop g4 now, and just see what can happen here. If white goes g4 now, bishop g6, and now knight e1. Now already black can go e6, and after f4 then d5, and it just doesn't really work for white here. If rook e1, which is probably the critical position, it was also played by Levon against MVL. Now bishop g4 is anyway working. h3. It's possible to take here, and black can get a solid position like this, but bishop h5 is probably the more ambitious move. And if g4, bishop g6. Now knight h2 was played by Aronian, which is the typical idea for those positions, but it just doesn't work here very well because black already has the move h6. Now e6, f4, and just bishop e7 was played. And after f5, take, bishop h7, of course the bishop looks ridiculous on h7, but so will the white bishop, because it's also not great on a2, and black is in fact better here. Also the b4 square is weak, knight can jump there to next, and white king could also be in some trouble long term. So the best move here is bishop f4, which is a novelty. But after e6, knight d2, bishop e7, e5, the best move for white. Now knight h7. It's quite difficult for white to grasp the position because like taking on d6 looks very logical, but now what does this pawn on g4 actually do apart from weakening the king side? Knight h4, knight g5, and black will castle. Whenever white takes on g6, black will get the open f-file, and it seems like black has more things to play for than white does if they take on g6. Objectively speaking, the position is balanced here. Best move here was bishop d5 probably, but I will not get into too much detail here, just to see what I looked at here. Black sacrificed the pawn, but again gets sufficient compensation here as well. If c3, this, by the way, I saw this in the French league. Cornet was white against Bel KID. Bishop g4 was played, h3, and now bishop h5. Once again, black got a very nice position here as well. Those positions, if you can get it, they are very nice. Cornet, in the end, was able to win here with white, but black, in fact, is already much, much better here. Next up, we have the Rossolimo with knight d4, which I noticed being played in the candidates tournament. And I did already have some people who asked me, is this line actually playable? Or is it as bad as I was taught that it would be? At least that's the case for me. Like knight d4, I never really took it seriously until now. I saw it in the candidates tournament being played, I think, by Bibisara Asobayeva against Goryachkina. And Bibisara got a normal position out of the opening and equalized fairly easily, as far as I could tell. And to keep it short, I think it is playable. Goryachkina definitely didn't put up the biggest biggest questions out of the opening, but overall I was not able to find some huge problems in this line. Goryachkina went for short castle. Instead, I do think that c3 should be the critical move. My analysis went like this: a6, bishop a4, b5. If bishop b3, bishop b7 is an important move, counter-attacking the pawn on e4. And after d3, something like this. e6, black can go bishop c5 next. And if d4, bishop e7, then knight e7 is coming next. And probably it's a little bit better for white objectively speaking, but you'll castle short next, probably knight g6. You do have some ideas to push f5 sooner or later as well. And it's not so easy for white also to utilize the big space advantage. If they go d5, we're just going to castle anyway. And if they take on e6, then we don't have a space disadvantage anymore. So we're going to be quite happy about that. And otherwise, the knight will have quite a nice square on g6. Also, whenever d5 comes, obviously our bishop on b7 is not the greatest piece, but our bishop on a7 is finally opening up. If the bishop goes to c2, then g6 is an important move to remember for us. Taking on c3 is usually not what we would like to do. It just accelerates white's development right here. And after g6, c takes d4, now bishop d7. I believe that this probably was her idea when going for the line. At some point, it's possible to win back the pawn, but at first it seems like it's a good idea probably to develop first. And if white tries to hold on to it at some point, like by going d5, then black often gets pretty nice compensation or tries to win it back later on. For example, if d4, knight f5, maybe also bishop e7 would be an idea to try to recapture the pawn. But the d4 pawn is also quite a big weakness here. The point of starting with knight e7 is that optimally you would like to recapture with a knight on d4. So going knight c6 followed by knight takes d4. This is kind of the main idea. But of course, one main idea of the line is also that white very often just is going to castle short because it is quite a logical move. And I think after that, black has kind of already maybe survived the worst, if you could say it like this. I do think that c3 is much more of a critical move than short castle. After short castle, now a6 was played by Bibisara. And after bishop d3, she played g6. And c3, bishop g7. Knight a3, d5 was played, and here black just had a normal position. Maybe instead bishop c4 would be a little bit more critical, and it is also the most common move in the position. Now black should go for the setup with e6, d3, b5, bishop b3, bishop b7, which is actually going to give us a very similar position to some of the e6 Rossolimo positions. So if black goes e6 on the third move, something like this can often also appear, like from a line like this, for example, which is nowadays also quite popular. So some position like this you could get if you played like this. Now bishop d6 is a good way of developing with the idea of going knight e7 next. So all in all, I'm not sure I would play it myself, but it does seem like if you want to play something which is maybe not the most mainstream theory and get your opponent out of book, doesn't seem like a bad line. That's the summary of of the line in my opinion. All right, so next up we have something else from the candidates tournament. Probably all of you have seen this one already. Let's start from the beginning. This was played by Fabiano against Javakir Sindarov in the classical Catalan with d takes c4, knight e5, knight c6, bishop c6, bc6, knight c6, queen e8. All of this is big theory. And here Fabi played the move bishop e3, which was not really that new for me, because at first I saw it being played, I think, by Nihal when he played it against Nepo in the World Cup of 2023, and already back then Nihal got very good winning chances in that game. Nepo replied with rook b8, but that was not so effective because after knight d2, rook takes b2, knight takes c4, Nihal was better. In all of those lines, it seems like white's king is very weak, but you can often just block the long diagonal with f3, and all of the dark squares are weak. On top of that, the pawn on the c file is often just a long-term weakness. So Sindarov, he knew everything in this game. He went knight d5, which is the correct move, queen c1, rook b8, knight c3, and here Sindarov took on e3, which is not a mistake. In general, I had a very hard time to analyze this position with the engine, because almost everything is just 0.00, but it's not easy to make this work in human terms as well, because as we will see, even though Sindarov had a great preparation, objectively speaking, he did get into serious trouble later on, because it seems like the position was just quite difficult to play. I think it might be a better practical choice to just wait here with trading and play a move like bishop d7 and then just slowly with h6. Now with bishop on d7, you kind of renew the threat of knight takes e3 because you would get a better version. So white should make some concessions, and I did also see some ideas for black to play with f6, bishop e8, bishop g6, or bishop h5, which seemed to me like it is maybe a little bit more of an active continuation. Because what happened in the game was this. Now rook takes b1, rook takes b1, and Sindarov even still knew this. He played a6 because white has kind of a positional threat here, which is the move rook b5 followed by rook c5, when then the rook on c5 is placed quite nicely. So that was the whole point of going a6, and I think that Sindarov mentioned that this was still his preparation. Like, for example, if rook d8, black could already be in some trouble after rook b5 followed by rook c5. And yeah, this was what happened in the game. Objectively speaking, it was nothing, but I'm not sure I would be so happy here with black. Black is a pawn up, but the bishop is not great. The knight has some nice future squares, like the c5 square, or just staying on c3. The b file is occupied as well. White always has ideas with rook b7. So I think that this line itself is something which white can definitely try. And it's not so easy for black. With black, I would be thinking of not going into this with rook takes b2. It doesn't strike me as the most practical. I did see that there was a game of Teodoro against Pavel Elyanov, where Elyanov was even able to win with black here. But I think that was mostly because Teodoro was just over pushing. I think that this itself is a very safe line for white, and it's quite difficult for black to do something here. So that's why I would prefer bishop d7 in this position. Let's go to the next one. This is just a quick idea. It was played by Magnus, I think, in some online game. In this line, another bishop c4 line, which is also quite popular nowadays. I think it was recommended by Adiban in his 1e4 course. Maybe it was also Gusti who recommended it. Not entirely sure now. But after e6, white's idea is to castle short. And black has quite a few moves here, which many of them are playable. I think also knight f6 immediately is quite a critical move as well. I think at some point I was looking at something like this, if it's possible. And it's followed by queen takes g4. There are some lines like this. Also queen e2 is maybe the better move here. But anyway, I want to show you this idea which was played by Magnus, which is a move bishop d6. Now, I will not go into too much detail here. I just wanted to show it to you because I think it's just quite a funny idea. And Magnus was the first one to, I think the first grandmaster to play the idea as well. Like we have a huge theoretical position, and there's still a move which has almost never been played before, at least on the highest level. And the idea is to develop with knight e7, short castle, and whenever white goes c3, then the idea is to go for bishop c7, and then to prepare for d4, for d5, pardon me. So for example, like this, black can take and then go d5. So this was against Duda, by the way. Duda played b4, which was quite interesting, and then we had some random position right here. Not, as I said, will not go into that much detail. I think the main thing to remember is that whenever white goes c3, then black should go bishop c7 to play d5 next. Cool idea, but yeah, something to remember possibly. Yeah, one more thing which was quite shocking to me to see was that the Philidor Antoshin variation, which is this line here with e takes d4, turns out to be playable again. This was one of the openings which I loved to play when I was growing up, when I was like 10, 11, 12, 13. My trainer showed it to me, and I had a lot of success with this line. Knight takes d4, bishop e7. But for quite a long time, I thought that the line was almost unplayable, objectively speaking, because white can go for bishop f4 here, which is probably the most critical move in the position. White also has other ideas, like for example g3 is not easy, but here black can try to force matters with d5, e5, knight g4, and it might be possible to make this work with black as well. Point is if e6, then black can go knight f6, and black is actually not scoring so badly here. But I wanted to focus on bishop f4 since it is often regarded as the killer of the line, at least that was my impression before. But Leon Levaich, the strong Croatian grandmaster, played this against none other than Vichy Anand in the German Bundesliga. And Leon was incredibly well prepared and banged out some 20 moves or even more, maybe like 25 moves of preparation, and then made an easy draw against the former world champion. So queen d2, and now d5. This is all still kind of standard theory. Knight db5, the main move. Bishop b4, and now queenside castle. Of course, it is very complex, but I just cannot go into too much detail here because we still have quite a few things left to cover. Just to say this is still theory. Knight takes c3, there's still around 30 games here. B takes c3, bishop a3 check, king b1, and here is kind of where things are diverging a bit. And black should play this move, bishop g4 in this position to provoke f3 and then to go back bishop e6. I think there was some line, the main point was that it's some line there was queen f3 protecting the rook on d1, and this is now not possible anymore without the pawn on f3. With the pawn being on f3. Also the e3 square is weakened, which can sometimes play a role as well. So this was what Levaich did. Now queen a5, black is down a full rook, but the knight on a8 is most likely to get captured at some point, and black also has pretty serious attacking chances on the king side. And black's score here is quite nice. Bishop d2, I think, is the critical move, but it has never been played before. It continues knight a6, c4, bishop b4, take, bishop b4, knight b4, bishop c4, and some position like this can come when black can take on a8 on the next move. White is objectively better for sure, but black does keep some compensation right here. Usually bishop c7 is the move which people are playing here, and also what Anand did. Now b6, knight takes b6, and knight a6. Knight a6 is, bishop takes a6 is possible now. Queen a4 was also played in 2 other games when queen takes c3 is making a draw more or less by force, just to show this variation right here. Black should give the perpetual like this, and queen b8 is quite a cool way of doing it. Queen f4 check, and white cannot escape the draw here. So bishop takes a6, now a takes b6, take. This was all Anand's game, and now bishop c4, actually the only move for white not to lose immediately. Rook takes b6 check, bishop b3, and black is actually quite nice long-term compensation, and white always needs to watch out for c5, c4. Leon played c5 in the game, but this did have some slight objective issue as far as I could see. Maybe I was not going too deep enough. But in the game of Anand, which went like this, apparently at this point, Anand played the move d5, after which black was almost taking over after rook e2. Okay, did end up in a draw eventually, but white is close to winning with the move g4 in this position. Okay, I don't want to, again, go into too much detail here, but that is the whole reason why objectively speaking, black should probably play the move g6 here, which is also what was played in one correspondence game. And now white can get sort of an advantage right here if they play like this and then take on d5, give back the piece, and then white does have probably the easier position to play with all of the pawns on the queen side. In correspondence, of course, it finished in a draw, but it does seem quite risky for black, if I'm being honest here, because white's plan is quite simple. They're just going to push the pawns on the queen side. Also, black is quite active with the king and with the bishop and the rook, so some counter chances could also appear with bishop f6 coming next, but it could be a little bit risky, and definitely it's one of the critical lines right here. But all in all, if you are a fan of the Antoshin variation and were afraid of the line with bishop f4, queen d2, I think this is something which you can check out. Because what other people were starting to do is knight c6. This was also played in Abdo Satorov against Martinez in the World Cup, and Martinez Alcantara was actually able to win. But I don't think that this line is great for black. It just seems quite yeah. I'm just not a fan of this. White is advancing on the king side, and it seems dangerous. Maybe objectively it's even better than the line which I showed to you, but I was always a little bit more of a fan of this approach with d5, just because it is so kind of an old line which has been forgotten, but at the same time also asks white a lot of practical questions. Okay, so next up we have one idea of Jorden van Foreest, which he played in, where was it actually played? Let me quickly see. He first played it, yeah, in the Bucharest Superbet Classic in about 2 months ago. From this Keymer opening, from the Keymer line, here with b3, c5, c takes d5, e takes d5, bishop b5 check, knight c6, and now Jorden took on c6. And there were already quite a few people that played it after him. And usually black was not reacting in the best way here, which is the same also Prag did. He played bishop d6, bishop a3, and now queen e7. And I have to give props to Jorden here for finding a very nice practical idea, because I think that this is the way most black players would react, just logically, protecting the pawn on c5. But now, after d4, white is just a bit better now, because black has some problems with the pawns on the c-file. Prag played the move queen e4, take, short castle, c takes d4. Only here it was kind of a shame that Jorden didn't find the right recapture. He took e takes d4, after which black has no problems whatsoever with f6. Maybe even black can be a little bit better. Instead, knight takes d4 would give white a nice advantage and a nice play against the hanging pawns. Here it seems quite uncomfortable for black to play this. Even difficult even to keep the d5 pawn, because knight c3 and rook d1 are both coming next. Seems quite dangerous for black. But to deliver a solution as well, I think that bishop g4 is probably the best here, which was then also played between Van Foreest and Aravind. And Jorden played the move knight e5, and Aravind replied with bishop h5, but bishop d6 is actually the best move here, when here it seems actually not so easy for white to keep the equality. If knight takes g4, just knight takes g4, and already queen h4 is coming next. I thought that Jorden's idea could have been bishop b2, but then knight d7, and yeah, also bishop takes f3 could come at the right moment. And I think that here black is doing pretty well. So if you remember bishop g4 here from the black side, and after bishop b2, knight d7, I think you're doing well against this idea. Okay, so let's go to one more recent idea, which was played by Nepo in the, was it the UzChess Masters? I think it was, against none other than Hans Niemann in their famous encounter in the anti-martial, which is this line here, a4, b4, d4, d6, which actually I also played against Yuan Yi in the World Cup in the second classical game. And Yuan Yi against me took with the pawn, which is one of the other lines. Usually knight takes e5 is considered the main move, but d takes e5 is also quite possible, and black is also not doing badly here. Actually, I was immediately much worse out of, not much worse, but I was worse out of the opening against Yuan Yi. The game went like this, and he just outplayed me later on. I think I made some bad move here. Yeah, I played c3, which is terrible. I should have gone bishop c4, but also here, black has quite active play here. Overall, I would say that d takes e5 is probably the less theoretical line, which also could offer more winning chances than knight takes e5. This is just my general impression, because as we are seeing in that game of Nepo against Niemann, there was another very nice game of Leko against, was it Alexienko? Leko beat Alexienko in the World Cup. Also, Leko had great winning chances against David Anton in the 2024 Olympiad. So there are still ideas to be discovered here, I believe. And therefore, from the black perspective, I would probably still choose this line. It was also often what Magnus played here for black as well. So what did Nepo come up with against Hans Niemann? Nepo actually mentioned that this was his World Championship preparation against Magnus. This is still all more or less established theory. Rook d6 as well. Leko against David Anton went like this: bishop e6, take, rook 81. And Leko later on had pretty decent winning chances. Maybe even had close to winning position at some point. So Hans played the move rook d6, which is considered the correct move. And now Nepo played the move bishop d5, which is kind of the big idea. There was only one correspondence game from the year 2014 in the online database, which I could see. And yeah, as I said, this was Nepo's World Championship preparation against Magnus from when they had their match. And also what Nepo then said in an interview is that it was actually Leko's idea. So Peter Leko was maybe also ready to play this idea against David Anton in the 2024 Olympiad, but he didn't get the chance since his opponent David Anton went for the move bishop e6 here. And Leko/Nepo said that it was more like a, what did they say, like some sort of psychological test for black or something like that, or like a memory test, which I think is kind of what it is, but at the same time, it does seem actually like a pretty great idea. At first, when I saw it, I thought, okay, I mean, this must be something which has already been analyzed deeply, and then there must be many, many correspondence game here, and so on. But it does seem like a pretty good idea, to be honest, and deservedly so. I mean, it was the World Championship preparation for Magnus. I guess that Nepo just didn't get the chance to play it because Magnus then went for these rook b8 lines against the anti-marshal. So it goes like this. Now c6 was played. Maybe rook b8 could be another alternative. I didn't even look at it seriously here, but I guess the idea is h3, knight f6, and then maybe knight takes e5. When I look at it now, there's this nice trick, knight c6, and the rook is threatened, and knight e7 is also a threat. So this is probably what white is hoping for. So Hans played c6, bishop b3, bishop e6, rook d1. All of this is forced, by the way, or more or less forced. F takes e6 also. Rook takes e6 runs into this when white also has some pretty uncomfortable pressure. Now king f1, again, more or less forced all of this. King e2, knight takes e4, and now rook d1. We're already at move 24 here, but this is basically where Nepo's preparation started, I believe. And the ensuing knight endgame seems like black has to be very, very careful, to be honest. Like taking here is risky because then knight takes e5 will come and all of the pawns on the queen side are just very weak for black. In the game, rook d5 was played, but then this was the whole idea. And white's king is entering, and in the game, Nepo then sacrificed his knight at some point. And this was the concrete point where Hans made the decisive mistake. He went king c8 when this was actually already winning for black, for white, just because all of the pawns are weak. I think, yeah, here king a5 was still maybe offering some drawing chances for black, but it was like only move after only move to hold for black. After knight g4, this is where it was definitely lost. So also what Nepo said is the right way to draw is to put the king here, and then after king e5, knight f6, and then this is probably the move repetition which could appear. White can also play on with a move like this, but okay, I will not again go into too much detail here. I just wanted to show this idea that I think it can be quite a nice test. Of course, all of the stuff which I'm showing you here, like ideas like this, if you're an amateur player, a club player, probably not much sense for you to study all of this because you will not get it on the board at all, probably. But if you're already on the master, FIDE master, IM, GM level, then it could definitely be something which you can try and get on the board and test your opponent. Yeah, next up, of course, I also had to include one of my games against David Navarra from my match against him, since I do think that this idea offers quite a lot of potential. And I don't think that anyone has copied it so far. It was something against Ragozin. against the absolute main line here, bishop f5, and now I played the move a3, which has only been played 5 times before I played it, which I thought was already quite a big success, because in this position there are still more than 1,000 games, and a3 mostly takes all of the opponents out of book, I think. Black has to take on c3, bishop e7 is not good because of queen b3. And now, to keep it short, I did already cover this in many of my videos about the match specifically, but the whole idea of my setup was that I will play like this, short castle, and then I want to play rook fb1, a4, a5, and then play against the b pawn. Often also knight d2 is an idea to stop black from getting knight e4. Objectively speaking, nothing is happening at all, but it is one way to get a fresh position, and I feel like if you can get this set up successfully, you will have a lot of pressure against the b7 pawn, and it's not so easy for black to realize where exactly you should play on. Again, if you want to see more information on this, I will put an info card right here to my match recap against David Navarra. Now let's move on to the next idea, which I would like to show you. Yeah, one idea in the Ruy Lopez Exchange variation for black, this was played by Sindarov in the Hong Kong FIDE World Team Rapid and Blitz Championship. I feel like the Ruy Lopez Exchange is something which people are often struggling with. Computer says that everything is fine anywhere, but it's still important to pick one line which you actually like. I used to be quite happy also with the line, was it, I think f6 was kind of my latest idea which I wanted to play. And there was the game of Erdogan against Sindarov, which I might have even talked about on this channel in the past already. But Sindarov made quite a nice advertisement for this line right here with h3 and bishop h5. Keep in mind h5 here is the main line, which is also not in a bad shape, but there are some things to be known here, and also white does have some possible ideas which they can try. Bishop h5 offers a pawn sacrifice, which white should take. If they go for a move like d3, then black can just go f6 or even bishop d6, and then black is a pretty good setup because white will not get d4 in, which is usually what they want to do if black goes for the f6 setup. So this is basically forced, knight takes e5, and now bishop d6. Knight takes g6, h takes g6, and the game which we are seeing here is Rapport against Sindarov. And the Rapport went for the main move, queen f3 in the position. Very logical, protecting the pawn on h3. And here, Sindarov played the move queen d7, which is not the main move, by the way. Queen h4 is usually what people are doing here. But now it's maybe not so obvious where the compensation is lying after king g2. And queen d7 is the move which is also favored in correspondence chess. Of course, all of the ideas which I'm seeing here, I'm always cross-checking if there are some experiences with correspondence as well, which is usually kind of the thing I'm always doing, also if I'm analyzing for myself. So with queen d7, black's whole idea is to castle queenside or even to push f5 immediately. But in general, this idea of f5 is kind of what saves the whole black strategy here and makes the line playable. Rapport went for d4 and Sindarov castled queenside. Knight d2 was played by Rapport and now f5, and actually black is taking over the initiative here. Rapport immediately ran into trouble, e5, bishop e7, knight b3, rook h4 was a powerful move. And Sindarov did eventually lose the game, but actually had a big advantage, and at some point in the game also winning advantage later on. e5 would have been a bit better for white, but black can go bishop e7 and f5 is coming on the next move anyway. f7 cannot easily be captured because then the pawn on h3 would be hanging as well. Also keep in mind f5 immediately was played in correspondence too. So it is also possible to start like that immediately and then just to castle a queenside later. But I think the way Sindarov played was more human, just to castle first and then to go for f5 after that. I also wanted to mention that d3 is probably the safer move for white. You could say it like this, it's hard to say if it's a better move. After d3, now it's important to start with f5 though. So what you can remember is that you get this position and you play f5 anyway on the next move. Because after d3 it actually makes a difference. If you castle queenside now, then you could get into trouble because white isn't time to get the knight to c4. And after d3, f5 now, if now white goes for knight d2, then you can take on g4, and then you can take on h3. And after queen takes g6, check king f8, black gets sufficient compensation. There are a lot of threats on the king side as well. Actually, rook h1 is quite a nice threat, just to show this. If knight c4, rook h1 is a forced checkmate. didn't even think about this while I was analyzing, but it is quite a nice trap which white can easily fall into. So queen f5 check could also be played, but here the position is equal. Black will take back on f5 next. This was another line which I looked at. Looks a little bit risky positionally speaking, but black was okay here after all. Knight h5, rook h5, important move to prepare knight f6 next without allowing e5. And black is just too active. Knight f6 followed by rook h8 is kind of the main idea, and there will be something happening on the h file. For example, this would be one way the game could end in a repetition, or knight x6 was played in correspondence. Black is doing okay here, d5, f3, g5, possibly with g4 coming next or rook h8. The position is equal. So it seems like another good idea against the Ruy Lopez Exchange variation, which probably white is not expecting as much because, I don't know, doesn't seem like bishop h5 is a move which white is maybe checking often because it is losing a pawn, so it could be worth a shot. Pretty sure about that. I think a good way of concluding this month's or this edition of the best opening ideas is just a quick one, which is a nice setup for white against this line of the English, d6, which is actually very popular. There are more than 10,000 games here. The idea of black is if white goes d4, then white can take, then black can take, and go knight c6, followed by a quick g6, bishop g7. And last time I checked, black was in pretty decent shape here. I think the important thing was to go for some quick a5, like it was maybe knight f6, b3, and now immediately a5, followed by some bishop e6, a4, or d5 quickly, and black was doing okay. Of course, white could also go for the move g3, also knight f3 is possible, but there was one game of Kartik Venkataraman, which I saw recently, and I really liked the way he played it. He played just with e3, very modest, and then he played with bishop e2, also very modest. After seeing his game, I also thought it makes quite a lot of sense to play a line like this, which is actually possible to get also in normal Sicilian if white goes for this line with bishop e2, let's say. It is often considered to be the best setup for black to go for bishop d6 followed by knight e7 here. So this is something which white could also play, especially if you're a Sicilian player with black. This would make a lot of sense. Something like this, for example. Also gives white decent chances for an advantage. But bishop e2 was the move which was played in the game. Knight f6, knight h3. This was the whole point, which looks very strange, but the knight on h3 is actually not bad at all. And the thing is, after knight f3, it is always running into e4. And if the knight is on h3, e4 is never really an attractive option for black anymore, because now the knight has a very nice square on f4. That's the main idea of putting the knight to h3. So short castle, and white's main idea also here is to develop on the queen side with b3, followed by either bishop b2 or even bishop a3. So in Kartik's game, black went h6, which is probably not the good move in the position. Now bishop a3 was played, queen a5 and queen c1, and black is under some pressure here. Now a3 and c3 are both protected. f4 was played in the game, which is already more or less the losing mistake, because now everything was working out for white, and white is just a clear pawn up, and Kartik eventually won, I think, fairly easily. In correspondence, knight e4 was played, and black is okay here, but it also at the same time, it doesn't seem like, first of all, an easy decision, and also here black is sacrificing a pawn, and is only holding... it's all a kind of a close call, I think. White is still a pawn up, can activate the king, maybe bring to f4. It is holding for black, but I think white is kind of playing for two results here. A lot has to go wrong for white to actually be worse here, in my opinion. Knight a6 to me seems like probably the best practical decision for black here. And if bishop b2, then black can put the knight to c7. Probably bishop a3 is the best for white. And now d takes e5 could be a threat with some pressure on this diagonal. And after rook e8, then I was not fully decided here. King h1 could be quite useful to anticipate those f4 ideas. It might not be entirely necessary just yet. Mamedyarov had one other game here against Leon Levaic, which we talked about earlier. And Mamed went for the move rook c1. And f4 is probably not a big threat just yet. You can give up the knight on h3 here. The king looks a little bit weak, but at the same time, all of the light squares are weak, and white should be a little bit better here. Everything is protected, and f5 could come next as well. Bishop f5, bishop f8 was played by Levaich, and now king h1, g6, rook c2 was, I thought, a nice idea, possibly preparing for some rook d2. And then he went back, and Mamedyarov actually won quite a quick game here in just 30 moves. So overall, I think it's a nice practical idea. You don't have to play with knight h3, even though I think it's quite of a funny setup, and it, to me, looks also quite effective. But also just a simple bishop d3 and knight d2, I think definitely does deserve more attention. Seems like one way for white to just get a playable game with chances of a nice advantage, which is not really the case when going for d4. g3, of course, is also possible, but seems to me like e3 is just a very nice and practical way of playing this. All right, so that was it. Let me know in the description down below which idea you would like to try it yourself, which you like the most. If you want to support my work, you can check out all of the different links in the video description down below, all of my courses, which I published on all different websites, as well as my other social media. And that was it for now, and I will see you guys soon.